Yeah.
My daughter was clocked this morning when it rains the habits. I have to get the letters out, clear it out. Oh, let's wait till the last minute.
My paper usually lands in my in the driveway between the street and the sidewalk. And today I looked out and it was down on at the other side of my property, floating towards the next driveway. It was not a good omen.
Freeze warm, right?
It is. I know you're interested in keeping things moving.
Okay, I am a bureaucrat.
And proud of it.
Yes.
Commissioner Javandel stated he'll be a little bit late, but
Okay.
I didn't hear anything from Del Rosario.
Well, why don't we start up slowly and get things rolling, and folks can join us as they can. To call this meeting, we'll wait for you to get seated. While we're waiting, I noticed, staff, that item 4.1 talks about the minutes of the virtual meeting of October 27th.
Noted.
Thank you. So with 4 commissioners here and understanding that Commissioner Javandel will be late, let's go ahead and start the meeting with our roll call.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Present.
Commissioner Graham.
Pick one.
Commissioner Javandel is absent. Commissioner Pang
Here.
and Chair McCroskey.
Present. I'd like to read the following land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lejeune. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and to together build a better future for all that now make this their home. And with that, I'd like to open the floor to public comment, and that includes those playing at home. And you would use the raise your hand feature in Zoom, or I think it's *9 to raise your hand if you're on your phone. Have I got that right?
Yes, *9.
*9.
We do have 2 virtual attendees who wish to speak.
And we have 1 in person. Let's start with the in person.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Commission and staff. I'm Peggy McQuaid, and as I wind down my term on the City Council, I want to take a few minutes of your time this evening to personally say thank you to each one of you for your service to our community. It's not always easy or convenient to attend these monthly meetings or to do all the work that comes in between the meetings. Meeting on Zoom for the past 2 years has impacted all of us in ways both known and unknown. I'm grateful for your perseverance and patience during this time. The Transportation Committee is in a unique position to serve all of our community members. You have the responsibility to help all of us, children, adults, and seniors, to get around town safely and efficiently using a variety of transportation modes. In a city constrained by physical space, your creativity and professional knowledge enable you to complete the puzzle of safe movement for all areas of our city. Fareed, and you can pass this on to him, Ken, and Robert, you deserve a special shout out for your longevity on this commission. Your wealth of professional and institutional knowledge and commitment to the safe transportation of our community is certainly appreciated. I used to tell the Arts Committee that they were the fun committee, because they are. But you're the only one that bring food. And you always have, and I think that's so cool. Of course, one night the Arts Committee did bring champagne. We won't share that story here. Anyway, thank you again for all of the work that you've done over these past 2 years, many years, and just know it's really been appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Peggy, and thank you for all of your work as well. It's hard to encompass that in a statement, but we do thank you.
Okay, for our virtual attendees, David Danby, please go ahead.
Hi, it's actually Julie Winkelstein. I just had a request actually for the, oh there, good, you disappeared for a while. I have a request, but I want to start by pointing out that it's pronounced LaShawn, just in case you're wondering, or in case you didn't know. But here's my question, my request is I was trying to find out what kind of battery is used in the VO e-scooters. So I first I looked on the VO website and I couldn't find anything. And then I did sort of a general search and I couldn't find anything. So then I just emailed them. I thought I'll just ask them. So my first email to them was, could you please tell me what kind of battery is used in your VO e-scooters? Thank you. And the first answer I got was, thank you for contacting us. Unfortunately, we do not have any public information available regarding the type or specifications of batteries used in our vehicles. If you have any other questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to let us know. Best wishes. And then signed by David R. So then I emailed back and I said, well, that's interesting. Why is this? And then David R. responded, our vehicles are not intended for private use and therefore our riders shouldn't ever need to change out a battery on one of our vehicles. So then I responded by saying, okay, I was just asking because I wondered if you have lithium-ion batteries because I've been seeing articles about the fire hazards of these batteries in scooters, and since there are a lot of your scooters in my city, I want to know if I should be concerned. And then he responded by saying the batteries used in our vehicles are maintained and serviced by experienced technicians and shouldn't pose a risk to riders or the community. So my question is would it be possible for somebody on the Transportation Committee to find out what kind of batteries are used in the VO scooters? I can't quite figure out why he's avoiding the question. And maybe you know, and maybe it is because it's lithium-ion batteries and they're afraid that they have such a bad reputation, they don't want people to know. But it was just very weird to me that he wouldn't just answer my question. And then they sent me a evaluation of their customer service afterwards, and saying, were you pleased with our service or not? And I said no, and then it said, it was an automated thing, and they said why? And I said because I asked a really simple question and I never actually got an answer. So that's my request to you is, would it be possible to find out? Thank you.
Thank you. We can't respond to that question in public comment, but I'm going to hold the question until we get to our shared mobility item on our agenda.
Next, Carrie Schulman, please go ahead.
Hello. First, I want to thank you guys for everything you do to improve transportation in Albany. I really appreciate that. I have 2 kids who attend Ocean View Elementary School, a 2nd grader and a 4th grader. And we bike to school pretty much every day. Not today in the downpour, but pretty much every day. And we live near the Albany Middle School, and there's 2 pain points that we encounter on our way to school. The biggest one is we could really use a safe route for crossing San Pablo Avenue, somewhere between Marin and Portland. There's really nothing north of Marin for bikes to safely cross San Pablo. And we've had several scary situations on Marin when I was trying to bike with my kids. So I don't really feel comfortable using that on a regular basis. So if you could have some sort of safe route for crossing San Pablo, somewhere between Marin and Portland, that would be hugely appreciated by a lot of people. And also the block of Jackson Street in front of Ocean View becomes totally packed with cars at school drop-off and pickup times, and it's really difficult to bike through there to get to the school. So if there's something that you could do to enable bikes to get to Ocean View on just that last block of Jackson, that would be greatly appreciated. Because enabling our kids to bike to school is so important, because enabling them to bike is going to build a future generation of cyclists. which is not only good for the health of our community, but also for the health of our entire planet. So if there's anything you can do to help with those two pain points, I think a lot more people would be able to bike to school. So thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Do we have any other?
I don't see any other hands raised at this time.
Okay. Then we will continue on with the agenda. And that takes us to presentations. We start with the monthly police data on collisions and citations.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. Justin Freed, the transportation planner. In the month of October, we're reporting from there were 0 pedestrian-involved collisions. There were 2 bicycle-involved collisions this month. There were 12 total collisions, 3 of which were injury collisions. 21 moving citations were issued, and 2 DUI arrests were made. That concludes the police data.
Thanks for adding the vertical lines as requested. Any questions from the commission? Seeing none, is there public comment on this item?
I'm not
There's no one in
seeing
the
any hands raised virtually.
And there's no one in the room. Are there any commission comments or opinions? Commissioner Rosario.
Yeah, thanks. I know in the past we've had the police chief attend and provide this information. I'm trying to figure out what's the best way for the commission to take in this information and have it be useful to our work on the on the commission itself. And it seems like if we had an idea of the incidents that happened, because there are not many of them, then perhaps that's a better way for us to provide feedback. And I think the police chief used to do that. I know that it takes probably some time between the incident itself and then identifying the incident and having it in the database. But I'm just probably thinking out loud about how we can be better served with the information.
Other questions, comments? In response to that, I would say we do a deeper dive on a quarterly basis, and maybe prioritizing what we want to ask staff to explore further during those quarterly dives would be constructive. Because you're right, the information is often delayed.
Right.
As investigations are completed and notifications happen and all of those things.
Yeah.
For example, we could say that we wanted specifically to know about vehicle versus pedestrian and vehicle versus cyclist incidents that are reported.
Yes, that's definitely a piece of it. Oh, if I may talk, sorry. I think even that information, maybe it prompts us to want to take some action, but it's difficult to take that action if we don't know exactly what happened.
What level of detail do you think would be constructive?
Well, I think if you had a description of the incident, then you can make some sort of motion or work with staff to say, okay, well, this incident happened and it could have been prevented with whatever measures we could have put in place, and we can prevent it from happening again in the future.
Okay. So you're looking for more detail than we get for example, in the local roads safety planning process, where it's just sort of aggregate data with locational information.
I mean, I think that's very helpful. It just seems like for this report, if you have 2 incidences, it probably helps the commission to do something with that information if the two incidences are explained in some sort of detail. Otherwise, they're just two incidences, and we don't know what we would do with that information.
Staff, do you want to respond about timing and details?
It's a matter of what we can request on a regular, ongoing basis. So we can bring that back to the police department and discuss how we could try to get more detailed incident information. It does take a while for it to come through the public statewide database that we access to look, that gets to that level of detail, but does have the long delay you talk about.
So you're pulling this information from Twitters, not necessarily from a report from the Albany Police Department.
The monthly data that is quick is from our police department. So it's a question of how much they could provide us in the interim before it comes through the state reporting.
Yeah. Just trying to figure out a way for it to be more effective of a report for the commission. Thanks.
Are there other opinions on which parts of the data we're most interested in? I proposed incidents between vehicles and cyclists, vehicles and pedestrians. You want to expand that, contract that?
I mean, without location, personally, it's not very, today I'm very happy to see a 0, but in my brain, it doesn't, pieces together the story. I know there's a limitation, but if there's any way we can look at the location data, that would be very helpful, especially as you mentioned the local road safety plan. If we can look at that to see if that kind of reinforces the perception we have, that would be great.
Yeah, there's a real difference between sort of the aggregate data we're seeing in the local road safety plan and this more real-time or closer to real-time data. And you're saying that the location is important.
Right. To me, personally,
Yeah,
it's the most important.
Right. So I guess my question was, the location is important. Are you looking for that for as much as possible, the information, or is there a certain subset that you're interested in more than others?
I think maybe if it's possible, if there's a way of, although data will always be outdated, if there's a mechanism where we build it up, even if we have a historical trend line of data for 2021, that would be great, right? It's instead of looking at the anecdotal, like monthly data without the location. I'm not sure if I made myself very clear. Like the data it will be at least 1 year old. That's my understanding, right? So even if we're looking now, for example, now we're looking at 2021 November. This is the aggregated data for the year past that point, where the location, and then showing the latest monthly data. That will be more helpful than just looking at the data for last month.
I guess that's interesting.
Not sure if that's possible, though. I know it's really hard to do.
I'm not going to respond to that, but I guess my interest is in the details of the accident, the crashes or the interactions between vehicles and people and vehicles on people on bicycles. And I think what you're saying is that you're interested in all of the data points related to their location. Okay. All right. I see Commissioner Del Rosario nodding.
Yeah, I think that is a way for it to be helpful. I guess maybe for the commission, it's a question of what is our expectations with being presented this data, and are we monitoring that our efforts related to safety are working, and therefore we're looking for downward trends, or are we looking for maybe upward trends that show us that we have to do more of a focus on preventing collisions as a whole? And I don't know if that's the most effective. I mean, it's a good high-level measurement of whether or not we're being effective, I guess. But seeing that the incidents, a number of the incidents, there's just not a lot of them, that to have that information in some detail, even if it's 3 months in the rear, then maybe that's more helpful to us.
So just to be clear, you would probably be interested in location, directions, fault,
Yeah,
those sorts of things.
correct,
Story of the incident.
correct.
Okay.
Location is a good starting point, for sure, right? Then you know that there's some multiple incidents or even, a description of this incident at this location. We can look at a location and say, right, when you observe this location, there's definitely some deficiencies here. So that is a helpful start, if that's all we can get.
Hi, Justin. Is it possible to ask, for example, once there's an accident happens, can the police just document, okay, the cause of it, some brief description, and made it public to us? Or that's not possible?
It's a matter of time on police department side. So we will discuss with them the request and see what they're able to do.
Okay. Let's start with that.
Yep, thank you.
All right. Thank you. Let's move on to item number.
Mr. Chair, I'm
Please,
sorry. to
please, please.
interrupt. We do have a hand up.
All right. Let's take a little public comment before we close this issue, this item.
Amy Smullins, please go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I just have a question. I was looking at the moving citations police report, and it looked like it's gone steadily down. I mean, up and down and up and down, but steadily down from 2016 to now. And I'm wondering if that's because people are actually breaking the law less and committing fewer moving citations, or is it moving violations, sorry, or is there just generally been less enforcement between 2016 and now? Just kind of wondering what the meaning is of that number going down, which seems good on the surface. Thank you.
Thank you. I've heard this question answered by the police chief, and it's my understanding that enforcement is, I would say that ticketing is down and that warnings are a more common response at the end of a traffic stop. So I don't think we can take this as a trend towards more law-abiding citizens, but a change in the style of policing. And staff is nodding.
Yes, we've heard that as well. That is, in many respects, that's a very good change that we're seeing overall, but it does have consequences on the number of citations written.
And it's good to be reminded of what those numbers mean from time to time. So thank you for the question. And if there are no other comments on the commission, we'll move on to item number 3.2, shared mobility data.
Thank you, Chair McCroskey. So I've attempted to switch the old data to be consistent with the now quarterly reporting we're receiving from GIG. So each dot on here is by quarter, one number for each quarter. And the dash line, vertical lines are when the previous change in reporting methodology took place in late 2019, and then the one that took place at the end of this year. So this is reporting on third quarter, July, August, September. Membership increased to 830 members overall in third quarter. There was a drop in trips, which was consistent with elsewhere in the region and what GIG saw prior year. It was approximately 10%, and they associate that with summer vacations and folks not utilizing them, with increased summer travel this year. In comparison to the region, the trips in Albany are generally less frequent. The cars don't move as frequently as in other parts of the region, but they do see longer average trip lengths and time. So there's balance there in terms of their overall operation, but that's just some trend information. And I can report briefly on VO. They launched about a month and a half ago now. We've received one complaint to date. We're not yet receiving stats from them, but anecdotally they've said origins and destinations have been concentrated around UC Village and the Solano corridor, with some riding to and from areas north. And that concludes my shared mobility report.
Thank you. We have one question carryover from public comment about finding out what the battery type is on the VO scooters.
We did receive vehicle spec information. I'd have to check if that included the battery type.
Do you want to get back to the questioner with that information?
I can get back with the information I have.
Thank you. Commission questions? Commissioner Del Rosario.
This will be a simpler question. Will there be a similar reporting from VO like we get for GIG on a monthly basis?
We should be getting quarterly reports from VO, which is what GIG is switched to.
Okay.
So yes, we should see similar quantitative numbers from VO.
Thank you.
Seeing no other commissioner questions and comments, is there any public comment on this item?
I'm not seeing any hands raised, Chair McCroskey.
Great. We'll return it to the commission. Any comments, opinions? I would say that it's good to see the car share data, at least the number of trips seems to have gone back up into the pre-COVID range, for better or worse, but it means there's activity and usage, and the membership is not wholly out of line there either, so I'm glad the service is being used. If there are no other comments or questions, we'll close this item and move on to our consent calendar. The consent calendar has 2 items on it, and at this point, I'm going to poll both the commission and the public to see if anyone wants to pull either of these items for discussion. Commission? Seeing none, are there any members of the public who wish to pull one of these items for discussion?
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
All right. I would entertain a motion on the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Graham proposes and Pang seconds. Are there any further comments or discussion? Could you take a roll vote, please?
Commissioner Del Rosario?
Yes.
Commissioner Graham?
So yeah, leave the red light on.
Yes.
Commissioner Pang?
Yes.
Chair McCroskey?
Yes. Motion passes, consent calendar passes, and we move on to item number 5, discussion of possible action on matters related to, in item number 5.1, this would be priorities for updating of the active transportation plan.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll briefly review the existing active transportation plan elements and some comparisons and open it up for commission discussion. So the existing Albany active transportation plan was approved in 2012 and it's been amended in 2014 and 2019, and it serves as the pedestrian and bicycle master plans for the city. It primarily informs street design, project prioritization, and support programs. It is a large document, and I'll run through some of the elements briefly. It sets out a vision had a technical advisory committee that brought forward for hopes and dreams at the to lead the project, developing good connections for walking and biking within Albany and to neighboring cities, creating special places for walking and bicycling in the city, taking advantage of Albany's natural areas and trails, and focus on community improvement and change. Chapter 3 set out key issues, making walking and bicycling to key destinations, identifying solutions for bridging major barriers, and developing a complete and integrated network that accommodates a range of cycling skills. This was a summary of a lot of the engagement and feedback that came through and survey information that came in to inform the next phase. It included collision analysis, which we're wrapping up. Hopefully will serve a large component of this for the update in our local road safety plan. Chapter 3 also included a review of existing programs, policies, and practices, and looked at the strengths and areas to enhance and opportunities within those. And Chapter 4 set out goals, policies, and actions, and was organized around the main elements of safety, accessibility, connectivity, public health, and other areas. Chapter 5 brought forward the network maps and vision for the network, both for the priority sidewalk and pathway network and a slimmed down skeleton sidewalk and pathway network for the shorter term priority, and sort of a dual slow and fast biking network. Chapter 6 went through and developed a prioritized project list with 27 listed projects and established priority tiers within that. It included a fair bit of detailed information, went project by project with the issues, the detail of proposed improvements, and some conceptual designs detail for each of them. And then Chapter 7 of the plan goes into supporting programs around education, encouragement, enforcement. And Chapter 8 goes through a discussion of funding sources, the conceptual facility cost estimates, project cost estimates, and a brief discussion of maintenance costs. And then there's a series of appendices that go into more of design detail, some of the methodology, and more detailed survey results, and various other design guidance and other detailed guidance. So quickly running through some key elements and some other plans that were mentioned in the memo. Alameda is wrapping up an update, and they have categorization, which you can't really see too well on here, but it goes into pedestrian street types. So they identify within their pedestrian network, break out the street types into neighborhood streets, neighborhood corridors, business main streets, gateway streets, and then went through in their design guidance for those, what elements of crossing treatments, corridor treatments, for these different street types, as instead of getting into that level of detail street by street, sort of just an overall matrix of these kind of elements for these kind of streets for their pedestrian network. Then they also had a vision for low-stress cycling network, a full network, and then what they call a 2030 backbone network, and then this sort of slimmed down backbone network is when they went into a little more detailed specifying the proposed facility type, and have some follow-up studies and execution on some of those projects. In Emeryville, one thing I noted is that they had a section that looks at multimodal focus areas, so bringing in the corridors where transit and cycling and pedestrian sort of interact. And some of them they call for, went into design detail on and went to that level. Others they call for additional multimodal study on those, and went through some of the cost estimate for that and sort of identifying an implementation plan around that. They also identify an all ages and abilities network and have what they call biking and rolling focus areas, some of which are calling for additional study. So the Stanford Avenue study, it details what the interest is and what the cost estimate for studying that in further detail will look like. They also went into proposed bikeway improvements by facility type. On the pedestrian side, they have both calling out specific sidewalk improvements, new sidewalks, new paths, or study areas, as well as spot improvements. So they separated those levels of investment and attention. One other study, couple of components from Alameda County Transportation Commission to reference. One is in the countywide active transportation plan. They did do a high injury network study that's relatively recent. Data would be comparable to what we would get now. We might get 1 or 2 years new data. We have the local road safety plan information that has some similar analysis, but they call out the high injury network both for cycling and for pedestrians within that plan. Work that was done pretty recently. And then the other element, they are in their policy implementation around the countywide bike network, going to giving pretty specific guidance on all ages and abilities facilities, pulling from NACTO guidance, National Association of City Transportation Officials, which really gets to the level of vehicle volume and speed, and what type of facility meets an all ages and abilities threshold. So the county is looking at this level of guidance for facilities that are going to rely on discretionary county funds, and recommend this as the go-to for all ages and abilities level of facility. But it does vary based on the speed and volume context of the roadway. And then one other plan I was going to note, just in terms of the approach in the city of Oakland's Let's Bike Oakland plan really had a strong equity framework and how they approach their planning effort, pulling in community partners for engagement, community organizations. They also did a representative survey, so they did a little extra work to get beyond the voluntary responses to try to get representative survey results in some of the feedback that they were soliciting. And they had a equity framework that really framed some of the questions and metrics and sort of benchmarking that they were looking at with their plan. And then the last thing I was going to note, which was discussed in the memo to the commission, is just that there have been a couple of elements that have come up in our discussions at the commission over the last several years that have pointed to an active transportation plan update to help speak to those. One was at the end of the Solano Avenue Complete Street Study, looking to an active transportation plan update to revisit the question of facility on Solano, our more recent discussion around Marin Avenue and the buffered bicycle lane and the possibility of going to a more full all ages and abilities facility on Marin. So the current plan really looks north to Washington and south to Dartmouth, and then further east to Sonoma as the all ages and ability, or at that time the slow bike network facilities for east-west travel. And we've both in those discussions for Solano and Marin called to an update to really to relook at that to see do we want a different network for the future for east-west travel. The other one that came up also in the Solano Avenue Complete Street Study was the current network north-south on the east side of the city has Peralta as the cycling route north-south. And at the time when we were doing the study, we thought Curtis as a crossing, now that there is a beacon, activated rapid flashing beacon at next to the elementary school at Marin and Curtis. Curtis may be a less elevation change and a comfortable route for north-south. So revisiting the network on the east side there was also something that was called out. And so with that, there were other plans mentioned, and this is just a few elements to bring to your attention, but curious other thoughts from the commission. But here are the questions that we have for you specifically. What parts of the Albany Active Transportation Plan have been useful to you as commissioners, and what sections of the ATP have not been useful as we think about an update? Are there elements in other plans that would have been useful or that you envision being useful for Albany? What additional questions or priorities do you have for an ATP update? And what planning elements or processes would you like to see in the update to answer open questions or address priorities? And with that, I'll open it up for discussion.
So a really limited topic. We probably don't have much to say about this, but anybody want to start?
Questions or discussion?
This is questions, but we've been asked some specific questions by the staff. So I would say that during this time, it's probably appropriate to answer questions like what's been useful from the past document, and then save opinions about the process, how you see the process being best managed, and what you want to see in the future ATP after we take public comment. Commissioner Peng?
Yeah, so not sure if I'm going to answer the sequences that you just proposed, but first, I think everything is very important. Like there's no part in that documentation is like not useful for me. I know it's 300 pages, but the problem I think I can find out is it's 300 page. I'm not sure who has the time to take a look at that 300 page. My first proposal that, if possible, that can include in it is to create a pamphlet that simplify it. That's the first step. Second step is we need to compare it to 12 years ago. We have much better technology right now. We should be able to make an interactive map on the City of Albany's website that shows all the network. As easy as create a KMZ file on Google Earth so people can play around, so people knows what their house is related to, whatever route is planning in it, that people can play around. Third, I find chapter 6 really helpful because it actually goes to the details like what's going on, what is planned, and then, but what is missing is it has this engineering drawings on it. That's not entertaining to look at and might, make not attractive people to take a look. So I would suggest, I don't know what's the proper way to do it, but any design students from UC Berkeley can help City of Albany can create all the before and after renderings to show, all the project and before and after so people can picture it, visualize it. And all the rendering techniques has been really fast-paced for the past 12 years. It's really cheap to make and really quick. So I think that should be also included in the updates. So that are the, also I believe for Chapter A, you guys are gonna do a significant updates to it, including like the funding and the cost, right? The other elements that we might want to include is now VIO is part of our transportation now, so this new type of active transportation should be included. Yeah, so that's all my shopping list for Santa. Not sure how far we can go, but I also have a question. So I look at it, there are 27 items on the prioritized project list. We finished around maybe 20 for the past 10 years. So does that mean that, even if we don't do anything, that will cover the next 10 years?
You're saying there are a certain number of projects unfinished that could take up our time?
Yeah, 27 items, 4 items is funded and planned, it's underway, and the other 24 is waiting, the 23 is waiting. So, yeah, that's
I'm
equal
not
to
sure
the
that's
amount.
accurate, but, okay.
But that's basically what I see, and it's equal to the amount of project we get done for the past 10 years.
Which page are you looking at for that?
It's I don't know, I think it's one of the attachment Mr. Fried sent to us. That has a screenshot of the table. Right.
I thought we had accomplished a significant number of these, and maybe that's just my own bias being here so long.
This table is from the plan when it was originally adopted, so.
So it's all done?
This was the existing, what was funded at the time of the plan adoption was not updated in the later amendments. So other projects that are not in Tier 0 have been completed. There are definitely projects on that list that have not been done, though.
That's really good news.
There's a minority of projects that haven't been completed.
I see, thanks. Sorry, one more question. So I noticed on the staff report saying we have so far hasn't get any LARC gaining planning grant to update the active transportation plan. So what's the consequences of that? We're gonna find other sources to fund it, or does it mean that we just have to rely on our own staff to do it without hiring, for example, like Farron Pierce, who did our last version?
So I can address the funding question. We've applied for grants in the past and have not been successful getting them. There are usually criteria that granting agencies are seeking that are good criteria in terms of, particularly these days, social justice and equity throughout the region. We don't score well on those. So we're expecting to use the city's operating revenues to pay for this. We do need to hire a consultant. We're not going to be able to do it ourselves, both because we're general practitioners here. There's some of those skills that we don't have. But also, more importantly, we don't have the time. And if it was to be a staff-prepared document, it would take ages. So what we'd like to do is hire someone, whether it's a Farron Pierce type of firm or a team, to prepare this. And our intent is to start working on that this coming spring. The funding will ultimately, the money, we won't be spending a significant amount of money on this until the next fiscal year. We'll start the budget planning for that probably in March or April. So we'll have a much clearer picture of what the budget capacity is. But given the history of the amount of funding that we've gotten in our department, I think we can accommodate this without having to make major compromises to what we need. Having said that, of course, we don't want to spend money on something that none of us are going to use. And so that's part of the question here this evening to get us started thinking about that is what is useful to you, and if there are sections here that are just, never looked at it or, too outdated, that's good too. So, yeah, thank you.
So, welcome, Commissioner Javidal. We're answering a couple of the questions about the current document, like the first couple questions there, and then we're going to take public comment and come back and, okay. Other commissioner comments on the current document. You both came in, I'm looking at you two, after the document had been created. You may or may not have read large portions of it. Were any parts of it useful to you? Did you see the influence of the ATP in the work that we've been doing?
I'm going to ask a question, actually, which is the requirements for the city for an active transportation plan.
I'm going to ask you to use your mic for the people who aren't here.
Can you outline the requirements of what has to be in an active transportation plan? And it doesn't have to be now, but in the future, can you come back and show like what, because I think that this is also, this, I'd like to know what in here, you know, is a requirement versus what was chosen when you scoped it out last time, because I'm interested in, yes, being efficient with how we would scope the future.
So I haven't looked to verify that the requirements haven't changed, but the Appendix A calls out the specific elements that are required for Caltrans bicycle transportation account funding at that time. So I'll need to review some more recent plans and look at it a little more closely to see if that has changed. But these were the required elements at the time of last one. So it included, sorry if it's a little small, required looking at existing patterns and travel behavior, looking at the existing network, proposed network, and some elements specific to safety education enforcement programs, detailing the participation and development of the plan, looking at consistency with other plans and neighboring jurisdictions, and then making prioritization and implementation.
So this is the first table in the appendix. So you can go back and, I'm also saying that for people at home. And you took my question. But that's okay. Did you have other questions or comments?
I have comments, but I am going to.
Okay. Looking for comments on the past document and its usefulness.
Yeah, I think it does the job of giving us the backing that we need to approve specific projects as we design, plan, and implement them, so that we can always refer back to the active transportation plan, which is the intent of the plan. I think to Commissioner Peng's comments, I agree that there can be a more user-friendly approach. Even the examples that staff cited with Emeryville and Alameda, those seem to be easier to comprehend and simpler to flip through and find the whatever information you need in those plans. The Oakland Bike Plan is also one that's very it's not simplified, but very user-friendly in the way that it's presented, and the key pieces of information that stand out, almost as if it's like a slide deck or, just lots of visuals in there rather than text. So it can be improved that way, but as a reference document in terms of what we were supposed to do and then tracking how we're comparing against it, I think it did that job okay.
Don't know which way. Okay. We've got the tiers of prioritization. For me, what's useful is having a prioritization, a plan that we can move forward. We've got a lot of sort of preliminary planning that we've undertaken on some of those, and implementation takes a while. So I think our focus should be to keep some viable projects ready for funding for construction, to look at kind of the updating of the prioritization, make sure that we still think that the things that are next in line should be next in line, and just generally our standards. If we decide that we need to do something slightly different for accessibility, for example, that's the kind of thing that we ought to update in the plan. But again, sort of a pragmatic, project and results-based approach is what I find to be really useful. So the pieces of it that do that are the ones that I like to have, and I think we should continue to use.
So I participated in the creation of the document and have been using it for these many years, and I have to say that the most useful thing has been the prioritization table. And down from that, the next tier would be the project plans themselves in terms of being study plans and ready to illustrate what was intended and to get them that much more ready for funding. Also, the document felt really alive, and I often referred people to it in the early years, especially the network maps, because they were showing both what was and what could be. And as we've diverged a little bit from that and iterated things, that they're no longer quite as functional. So there's kind of a life to the document, sort of a bell curve life that might be 5 years, 7 years. But especially the sidewalk network in the ATP has been really useful and helped us develop the whole sidewalk repair program. Gave us a framework to launch off from there. Not as useful to me because of quick change in the standards nationally were the sort of references to standard building types for transportation improvements. It was aged pretty fast. The length and size of the document was definitely always a bit of a stumbling block. So, some kind of entrance document or portal might be useful. We do get asked as a commission often, what's happening with this? And that information is often out there, but not so easy to find. Okay. I think it's time to open this to public comment.
Okay, if you'd like to address the commission, please use the raise your hand function. At the moment, I see 3 hands. First, Carrie Schulman, please go ahead.
Hi, yeah, this is really exciting looking at this. I agree with Ken that number 6 project information sheet with the different tiers is a really helpful page on the document. But what I'd like, it'd be really helpful if you could say why things were put in different tiers. I'm so excited by number 18, the Washington Avenue Bicycling Boulevard route. That's like my dream come true if that could actually happen. But I'm sad to see that it's the very last item in tier 2, which seems like, I don't know if it's gonna happen before my kids move away to college, and my daughter's 7 right now. But so I'd love to know why it's so low on the list, and if there's anything that can be done to help make that actually happen. And specifically about that number 18 item, I see that a lot of thought has been put into the part that's east of San Pablo, but Washington west of San Pablo is a really narrow road. So if that's gonna be a good way for bikes to cross, I love biking on Washington, east of San Pablo, but west of San Pablo, it's so narrow that something's gonna have to be done to make that a viable biking route once you get across San Pablo to safely get to Jackson. And I would be so happy to be able to use that route for my kids to get to school, and I know a ton of other people would too. So thank you. That's just what I wanted to say.
Okay, thank you. Next, well, it says David Danby, but I suspect this is Julie. Please go ahead.
You're right. You got it. I only came to the meeting to ask the question about the VO thing, so I didn't read this in advance, but I'm trying to skim it as fast as I can. I'm looking at chapter 7, and I can't tell, are we just focusing on one part of this plan, or can I talk about chapter 7? Can somebody just tell me? Is it
You can
okay
talk
to
about chapter 7.
Okay, I can. Okay,
Can you
good.
tell us the title first, though?
Recommended education, encouragement, and enforcement programs is the name of the table in chapter 7. It might be the same, enforcement programs, I think it might be called. And so I was looking at the table there, and they have recommendations for enforcing, for making the streets safer for pedestrians in particular, and that's what I'm concerned about. And I'm just saying, I just wanted to say that I like the idea of all these enforcements. I don't see any of this being enforced. I know that earlier you had a report about traffic accidents, and I can tell you that I was out walking the other day, and I twice almost got hit by a car on Solano. Because you have to be extremely careful if you're walking around Albany, because cars don't stop at stop signs, don't stop at red lights, especially if they're turning right. They definitely don't stop at crosswalks on Solano. So you have to be vigilant all the time to be ready to jump out of the way. You have to meet the eye, make sure that they really are going to stop. And so the idea of having these sort of punitive things that they have all sorts of there's all sorts of cool things here, like a fake pedestrian to catch somebody, like a pedestrian sting, it's called, to catch these people who don't stop for people in crosswalks. There's tattletale lights, and there's increased fines, and which I think all of those would be great. I would really like to see more enforcement and more encouragement of cars and bicycles, for that matter, stopping for pedestrians. And I also had a question. I brought up increased fines several years ago that I thought that the city of Albany could afford to pay another police officer if they were to ticket every single person that drove through a stop sign or a red light. But I was told that most of the money doesn't go to the city of Albany. And I guess I wanted to get that confirmed, that actually it goes, I don't know if it goes to the county, but it doesn't go to the city of Albany, and maybe some small percentage of it is, and I wish if more of it went. So basically, I would like to see more enforcement, more awareness. I also was under the impression that bicyclists had to stop at stop signs, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe something passed in Albany. I know there was a vote, because none of the bicyclists that I see ever stop at stop signs and rarely stop at red lights, and I also consider that dangerous for pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Brian Martin, please go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, as a resident of Albany on Adams Street near the bowling alley, I would like to make sure that the commission is, and the active transportation plan is forward-looking with regards to the future that the housing element has laid out, and that the state housing law has been moving, the direction the state housing law has been moving, that allows denser and denser developments with less and less parking. So that, and there's all sorts of things that could go into that this active transportation plan, was going to be central to addressing these issues, not just for the new people in these buildings, but also for the people who live around them, to get by with fewer cars or no cars. And some of that could be, requirements for what goes into new buildings with regards to bicycle or scooter or, whatever forward kind of thinking things, parking there is, outdoor parking for those kind of things, maybe even things in communities, but also things that aren't necessarily capital related, like programs for car shares. When my family was down a car for a while, we used something called City Car Share. That was like 10 years ago. And that helped us get by with fewer cars when we needed a second car every once in a while. We have gig car, but it's pretty limited. It's good for some things, but limited. But basically, there's lots of different things. Some of them are physical code-related things, and others are just sort of like plans for communities. I saw that the Adams Keynes Bike Boulevard is just waiting for some equipment to arrive. Otherwise, it's basically ready to go. I think things like that need to be supported. I know often the people, you have to build the infrastructure where you can, when you can. But given the reluctance of some of my neighbors to embracing a bike boulevard that supports alternative transportation right next to San Pablo Avenue for some reason, I think it's critical that the city active transportation plan include things that support those kind of networks, like the bridge across the creek, which there's already another bridge west of it that's being put in soon. So, or something that will get people connected further north on Adams, for example. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Amy Smullins, please go ahead.
Hello again. Staff's emphasis on the all ages and abilities, including youth and seniors, is really crucial. Thank you for that. With e-bikes much more prevalent than they were when this first and almost seniors like me. Did you hear me? Because I just had to unmute again.
You cut out for a moment, but you were saying e-bikes are important for
e-bikes
seniors.
Are much more prevalent now. So it makes cycling for seniors and almost seniors much more viable and comfortable. So that all ages and abilities is crucial. As the speaker in the previous public comment pointed out, it's really a challenge for kids to ride to schools, and we're literally a 1+ square mile city with no actual winter, so it really shouldn't be challenging. Walking, biking, and riding scooters should be safe, comfortable, and simple for everyone, including to schools. And the active transportation access to schools and on the way to school should be prioritized over motor vehicle access. No one who's cycling to school should have their life put in their hands or be made more difficult by someone who's trying to drop their kid off right in front of the school. That really isn't necessary. Connectivity is also crucial. Isolated facilities aren't useful if people are then going to be stuck at a danger point somewhere else. So everything, I know things are put in piecemeal, but please consider the connectivity. Commissioner Peng's idea of an interactive map online is really a good one. Berkeley had something similar to that recently, and people were able to see other people's comments on location and add a +1 and add their own comments, which was, I think, really super helpful. Don't forget to take scooters, scooter share, and possible bike share into account in your planning, including parking facilities for those modes, because those are something that didn't exist when the most recent ATP was out. And also west of San Pablo is where so many people live, and the apartments and condos on Pierce Street, and then the future development on Cleveland. So don't forget about the people in West Albany, and don't strand them. They've got to have safe access to schools and businesses too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
At the moment, I'm not seeing any other hands raised. If anyone would like to address the commission, this is the time to raise your hand. I'm not seeing anyone else, Chair McCroskey, and no one is here in the room with us.
Thank you. We had one question from a commenter about enforcement and ticket money. And from what I've heard generally over the years, it seems to be true that for moving violations especially, most of the ticket value goes to the county, I believe, for the courts and the jails.
Right. I don't know the details, but I believe that's correct, because there's a appeal process that people can pursue, and they do pursue, and that's funded through the revenues that come from the fines.
And that would also take up officer time as well for appeals and
That's
court
right.
appearances so that it's not practical to pay for enforcement through fines or ticket fines.
And also, I don't think it's considered a best practice in policing to rely on fines in order to support the expenditures required by the police department.
At least not in our urban environment. I'm sorry, that was a joke about rural speed traps, but we're not going to do that here. So can we bring back up the page with the questions? We've got some good input from the public. We had a couple of letters, and we've got a couple more questions here. What additional questions or priorities do you have for an ATP update? What planning elements or processes would you like to see in the update to answer open questions or address priorities? So let's throw this open to comments and opinions from the commission. And I'm looking for somebody to get us started.
Go ahead.
Commissioner Grant.
Great, thanks. Well, I'm excited about the opportunity to do this, and I think particularly it's because since my time here, I feel like we have been asked to parse out some of the design of some things. You know, as we're doing when we're doing striping and roadway improvements, and so I'm looking forward to thinking holistically about it. I guess one of the things that I would say in question to what I feel like has been useful in the previous plans is I think the prioritization of projects is certainly important. I find the drawings and the engineering drawings to be actually not helpful because I feel as though I think your comment that
Intimidating?
Huh?
It's a little bit intimidating.
Well, it's intimidating, but I also feel like actually the design changes so quickly in this world that they feel out of date, and so I don't quite know what they give. So I feel like something, maybe a little bit more visual might be good. And I guess what I'm saying is, if we're going to be efficient with where we spend money, I'm not quite sure that's what we need to do, and would rather see that level of design, be done further when we're either actually thinking about implementing it. And then I guess I'll just support, the idea about making sure we're designing for multiple ages. I think also one of the things I liked in one of the other examples that you showed was rather than just like a sidewalk sort of gap sort of networks, it was more of thinking about the different utilization of the pedestrian network in sort of the same vein in which we think about bikes. And I think that would be great if we could do. I agree with the need to, as the last commenter said, really be thinking about our housing element and where we think development is going to be happening so that we can make sure that we are continuing to sort of put into place the infrastructure to support those changes in land use. And then also particularly looking at multimodal streets. I think often transportation or transit and sort of ped and bike infrastructure can sometimes be seen as in conflict with one another, and therefore we put them parallel. But I think really what we need to do is best practice to figure out how we can create great streets that can be for transit and pedestrian and bikes all at once. And then I think the last thing I'll say is I just really appreciated AUSD's letter and willingness to coordinate, and I think that's a really great opportunity for us to take advantage of the school district's participation, even with thinking about how we can coordinate with the students in terms of how we do our outreach. So.
Great. Who would like to go next?
Thanks. I think the main point I wanted to make was one that Commissioner Graham made about integration of the active transportation plan with other modes of transportation, particularly transit. I think all of these plans, they do mention that access to transit is key, because every transit rider, of course, is a pedestrian at some point. So I think that's one part of it. I think the other part of it is making sure that these modes don't compete with each other. Oftentimes, because parking or private auto is held sacred, there's limited space for these other modes of transportation to exist. And then therefore there are trade-offs that have to be made, but they don't include the private auto. And particularly in Albany, there's not that many streets where transit operates. So there's 4, and UC Village, I guess it is, Buchanan, San Pablo, Solano, Pierce, and UC Village. So I think, those streets should be carved out as places where we want to have complete streets treatments, or some different type of typology, right, or modal priority. Like San Pablo is going to be the transit corridor, and Keynes and Adams are going to be the bike corridors. There's lots of different ways that we can look at that, but just some way that the different modes are well integrated, and we're not hurting one mode in order to advance another. I like the comments from the public about how active transportation has just evolved since the last time that we created this plan. So whether it's bike share, e-bikes, and all of the associated infrastructure required to have those modes of active transportation be successful. Scooters, forgot that as well. So we see that out there, and I think we have to have ways to accommodate those, and an active transportation plan is a good way to do that. To the extent that equity is a factor or a goal that we want to include in the plan, it should be highlighted and used in terms of doing the analysis and the recommendations for projects. I think a number of the other plans, I think Alameda and Oakland also had a toolkit. So being more, starting with more of the elements of active transportation, and then applying those elements to the various corridors might be a better way to explain what we're doing to the public, instead of just jumping from the network and then to individual projects. And also it gives the commission and others in the city some additional information to put forward spot treatment projects, and we can fall on or fall back on the active transportation plan to give us some guidance as to how these elements would be applied. So it's not necessarily the projects, although the projects are important. That's probably the key piece of this plan, but I think having some individual elements is important. Monitoring and measuring your success, and what does that look like? So were the projects implemented as planned? Did they achieve the goals of the projects as we intended them to be implemented and built? So some sort of section about follow-up and measuring our success would be helpful. I think that's it. I can't remember what we said about lighting, if that's just going to be a completely separate plan. I vaguely remember us thinking that there was some component of the active transportation plan that would look at walking and biking at nighttime versus the daytime. But I don't know if that's just too much for the city to bite off for this effort. And I think that's it. Thanks.
Thank you.
I've already stated my comment. So, right, chapter 6, most important, visualize it better before and after renderings. I totally agree with Sarah about, maybe we don't need that much engineering map for now. We can do it when we cross that bridge. But for now, maybe just giving people a better picture of what it looks like will give us more support. And then I agree with Commissioner Desario about, on page 93, chapter 4, goals, policy, and actions, that list. If we can have a section in the updates telling how we achieve that, that would be great. Thanks.
I'm going to reiterate that the priorities are important, recognizing, of course, that may drive what we pursue funding for, but sometimes opportunities pop up and we're going to leapfrog over things on the priority list. So the next thing is I agree with the idea of having concept level drawings, saving the engineering design until we're ready to advance the project. I think that is a cost savings for us if we do it that way. Network maps are useful to help identify opportunities, especially when private developments happen to pop up along a route where we want to do something. We can capture that and recognize it quickly. And then I completely agree with the idea of having our network identify modal priorities for key corridors. San Pablo Avenue clearly is a primary route for buses. We're not going to divert the buses onto Keynes and Adams. So if we have to pick between modes on San Pablo Avenue, we're not going to be displacing buses. We just need to be clear about that. The same way that we're not going to displace cars from the freeway or bikes from the Albany Greenway. There have to be certain corridors that, by necessity, you've got a mode that's going to take priority when you can't fit everything. And I think that that's going to help us to refine our network and be realistic about what we can achieve.
Okay. I generally agree with the idea of study plans. I think you have to get to a point where you can explain what it is to the public for the process and amongst ourselves so that we can do the prioritization. And also so you can get to the point where you can have a rough cost outline so that you can use that cost to help prioritize and understand the trade-offs. Commissioner Graham mentioned the school district letter, and they referred to the Environmental Action Master Plan, which is currently in draft stage. And that plan actually talks about specific goals and cycling classes and refers to a goal of a continuous network of protected cycling paths, presumably connected to the schools, although I don't think that's explicit in their plan, but it's implied. It's interesting, a lot of time has passed since the last document came out, and it was a lot of engineering changes have happened, a lot of projects have come and gone, projects come up. I actually would be interested in taking a step back and saying, part of this ATP is to implement an Albany where a mode change can take place. And our environmental goals actually dictate that it should. And I'd like to look at it, at least in part, in terms of what's it going to take to get the people who aren't comfortable getting on bikes but who are interested, which statistically is apparently a large proportion of people. It's said that approximately 12% of the people who are interested in using a bike to get around do, and most of the rest don't feel confident in getting out on the road. So creating safe spaces would encourage those people. So if we're trying to shift away from large vehicles that both are carbon intensive to produce and dispose of no matter what fuel they use, and often are carbon intensive in terms of running, then we really need to think about how do we get them into micromobility and e-bikes, e-scooters, shared or otherwise. And I think that's really going to take protected bikeways. But how much and where? You know, the city went through a process several years ago looking at Solano Avenue, east of Masonic. And as a city, we really didn't come to a consensus as to what we wanted. There's a demand for micromobility on a street like Solano. Is that a process that we want to make part of the ATP? Is that too contentious? Will that stall out other planning? We need to think about that. I also look at sort of beyond the built projects in terms of what are the things that go along with these projects for encouragement. So sort of the soft programs, like, do we want to go through the process of becoming a bike-friendly community? And the hurdles that may entail in terms of what we have to implement and keep up. And just as a side note, I want to say that recently the League of American Bicyclists has announced that Sherrod roads will no longer count as a bike facility towards cycling facilities in that program. Just shows the shift in thinking. But there are other soft programs like the Safe Routes to School program, which we currently have, and the school district specifically calls out to support. There are other departments in the city. We get involved with the policing at some point, but you know, should we be asking the recreation department to sponsor bike skills training? And you know, whether on a bike or in a classroom for you know, best practices on the road. Somebody mentioned, you know, everybody becomes a pedestrian at some point. You know, you get out of your car, you're a pedestrian. I like to think that, well, I believe that in terms of complete streets, we only win as a community if everybody feels safe and has access. So that's bikes, scooters, people feeling safe on the sidewalk, like they're not going to get run over by bikes and scooters, transit users, people who need to drive because they're handicapped and have challenges. They may need to get across those facilities. How do we integrate all of that along with the transit users and the people who are driving to pick up their Christmas tree on Solano? It's a challenge, but I think it's important. We touched on equity a little bit. Obviously, for funding, targeting lower income areas or less served areas is going to help us be more competitive in terms of grant funding. And I think to some extent, despite the fact that we put in a bike and ped path on Buchanan as part of the ATP priorities in part, it really doesn't connect to the Pierce Street condos. And we've really got to finish that connection. There's a large population there. Many of the kids go to Ocean View School. There actually aren't great walking routes currently because of cars parked on the sidewalk on Pierce Street and other reasons. So I think looking to our western area is really important as part of this process. I have lots of opinions about very specific things to look at in the ATP, but I don't think that's where we are tonight. So I'm not going to go into that. Those are my thoughts. Any further thoughts from the commission tonight?
I guess from a scope, schedule, budget sort of perspective, I would like to, from fiscal sort of conservation, encourage staff to take a hard look at, sort of what we do, what you also feel like has been the most beneficial from the people who have been, had to implement these projects over the number of years, and sort of, at least I personally would like to see a scope, not the whole, I don't want to read pages of it, but I'd like you to think where you should focus our efforts in terms of how we can make the best difference so that we can focus on doing that rather than maybe revisiting some high-level goals and objectives that are largely maybe haven't changed that much because they're always very broad and sort of really far-reaching. So I guess my thought is like, let's do the most with like what we can and not also drag this out and make it the 300-page document that it is.
It's amazing how much has changed. We didn't have a climate action plan when the ATP was written.
I'm only saying this because I have been a pedestrian and bicycle planner, and so I can suck up as much money as you'll give me. And so I just would encourage the staff to be articulate with how we can best spend that money.
Often what will happen in these processes is we'll come up with a proposal, and then we would send that to City Council, and they would give us direction. Any further comments?
Once we get the proposal, is there any way we can share this with the school and parents group that they are really actively trying to get involved with this? To get their opinion will be very important too.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, and that might be a role that we could help with as commissioners, and actually both invite the school board and the individual school sites, and perhaps divide up the school sites among ourselves and try to make personal connections to make sure that we loop in all of the communities.
That's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Staff, did we answer your questions sufficiently?
I have one reaction that I'm a little bit surprised by. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I got the sense from your discussion from several of you that this is a document, a tool that you use when you're communicating with other people in the community. And, we think of it as a tool that we use in interacting with you and with City Council and with our colleagues in other departments as we're trying to figure out what to do next or what to do when we're repaving a street because of a sewer project or something. Okay, what are we supposed to do here? But you're using it in a way that I'm glad. It didn't occur to me, and I'm just kind of testing that for a second, that as you're talking to people in the street or they're asking you what's going on, that this is something that you use in that context. Is that right?
Personally, yes. That's the stuff we will be using, or we are using to communicate with the public. Not sure if they can hit, one stone hit the two birds at the same time, but if I have to pick, I would stay on the communication side.
For those members of the city, or residents of the city that know that we're transportation commissioners, there's a lot of excitement and questions that we'll get about when are certain things happening, why is this intersection so unsafe, or why can't my kid bike across San Pablo? just like the public comments we heard. And so oftentimes we're put in a position where we have to try to respond to those, and referring them to documents is definitely a good way to do that.
Yeah, and as I said before, that's something that occurred for me a lot at the beginning and has trailed off over the years. But this is not a dig. It's hard to keep the website updated. Yeah. And, you know, we had one public comment tonight about the intersection of Washington and San Pablo, and this commission has worked a lot on plans for Washington and San Pablo, and I think we have a pretty good idea of what's going on there and expectation. But how do we communicate that? And Commissioner Pang talked about some ways to do that. And the ATP was actually a useful document to say, yes, there is consideration happening, and there is some actual thought around the network for both walking and biking in Albany, and here's what we think we're going to be doing. And that helps people feel like there is a rational mind, communal mind at work, and answers some of their direct questions. And I've actually, as time has gone on, I've been involved in a project to create an all ages and abilities map that I've shared with the commission, and because it's not reflected well in the ATP, and things have changed since then. And so maybe that's a goal of the plan for an ongoing process to some extent, or a revisited process on a faster than the ATP required update process.
If I can add one more thing, I think other cities use documents like these and other master plans, especially these days, to be more transparent to the residents of the city and other users of the city. And I don't think we have that issue in Albany of a distrust of government. But I think transparency is still a really good way to go about doing government work. So things like this that are put in plans that are easy to read and understand by the public can go a long way.
I guess the only follow-up I would add, as you continue to think about this, if not tonight, what additional sort of tricky questions or open questions that you would look to an ATP update to answer. And we've talked a little bit about whether the facilities on Solano question is one that this tackles or not. We'll continue to noodle that, how to approach that. But if there are other questions like that that have come up, or that you would look to this process to really try to answer, that would be helpful.
Well, so I think of two corridors where there are some challenging proposals that I've heard. One would be Solano, whether it's east of Masonic or all of Solano, creating some form of micromobility track, either in one direction or both. You know, trade-off with parking, issues with city line. What would trying to pull that consideration into this process do to the timing, the cost, and the burden of, in general? You know, the school's proposal, the environmental action plan, master plan draft from the schools talks about protected biking network. One proposal I've heard is to take public right-of-way inside the curb on Marin Avenue, shift the sidewalk in and create space inside the trees for a cycle track on one or both sides. That's a somewhat radical proposal, but Marin is a gateway to several of our schools and could be a way to provide a safer experience for all ages and abilities on a major transportation corridor. But there would conceivably be a trade-off in terms of the amount of discussion sucked up by that particular effort. So I'd be interested if in the future, if staff has ideas about what the trade-offs are there, those two corridors.
Can I just add on to that? Solano and Marin are shared with Berkeley. So is there anything Berkeley's doing that we can rely on?
Nothing beyond that. I think they're mostly looking to coordinate with what's already been planned for Solano by Albany.
The history there is that before the pandemic, there was, I believe, a $500,000 budget item for a planning process for Eastern Solano Avenue in Berkeley. That money disappeared as priorities were changed during the pandemic. I haven't heard anything since then, and neither has Commissioner Javidal. So there was certainly some communication going on and some interest, but that would have to be renewed.
I would always think that Berkeley might be a little bit more progressive than Albany. Maybe that's just me.
I would just say that Berkeley has been somewhat progressive in the past, and as a larger city, might have more resources to do more experimentation.
Exactly, yeah. And also, given the fact that Marin and Solano goes through the wealthy part of Berkeley, that makes things a little bit different than the overall impression.
But yes, and it also changes the grant possibilities and likelihood. So there's, yeah, it's, yeah.
Well, ultimately, the decision about what is included in the scope of work is a council decision, and that's a policy decision. I think where we're looking at this right now is we need a decision on Solano Avenue, and we need it soon.
When you say soon,
we're under a court order to do curb ramps, court settlement, and I forget exactly the deadline, but it's over the next few years. So it's a challenging question, but I think it's probably the most important question. You know, of course, the city council can decide they don't want to take that on. That's their prerogative. But from where we're looking at it from the staff perspective, we're ready to know what the answer to that question is.
okay. With that information, I'm inclined to include it in the ATP. How do other commissioners feel? Or do you want to think about it?
I'm not inclined to make a decision tonight.
Fair enough. Other thoughts?
So does that speed us up or slow the project down?
Well, staff is saying they need an answer on Solano Avenue.
Yeah.
It's city council's prerogative to determine what planning process that entails. They could say, we want to do that right away and separate that from the ATP and take it on separately.
Slow it down.
I don't think you need to answer the question tonight. I just wanted to react to your discussion. The next step will be bringing back to you a draft request for proposals for your review and then for the council's approval to send out. And that would be the place where we would identify that as a particular issue that needs to be, or a particular policy decision that needs to be evaluated, go through the history of the complete street study. And that might be a time when you're looking at the draft RFP where you could say yes or no as in terms of a recommendation to the city council.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know that that item is on the clock. Closing thoughts? Moving on. We're moving to item number 6, announcements.
The listed announcement was that Marin and Pavement Rehab Phase 1 is underway. It got underway early November, so you maybe have seen some initial work going on along Marin. It'll continue.
If I could just comment that I received some information that, well, I saw a sign myself that said, "Share the road," with the bicycle symbol. It was placed in the middle of the bike lane leading up to the construction. And I've heard from others that there were complaints about the placement of signs. Just giving that feedback.
There will be work along the curb with the curb ramps and bulb out, as you know, as well as some lane change, but, well, noted.
Thank you. Future agenda items. Staff, do you want to talk about what we're going to be working on next?
Expect the local road safety plan, draft plan to be posted for public review in advance of January's meeting and for discussion at the January meeting.
Do any commissioners wish to make requests for future agenda items at this time? Okay. This is not an item we take public comment on. So that brings us up to our next meeting, which is Thursday, January 26th at 7 p.m. I believe we reached the end of our 2-year rotation. So it's time for any commissioners who wish to continue to serve to put in their application and talk to the new city council people in some cases, or their current. And I hope you're all interested, and if you can. And yeah.
And you should expect that that you will continue to serve at least for the January meeting unless someone has been appointed in your position. So sometimes it takes council members a little while to do this. And so do please leave your calendar, even if your council member is termed out or you've decided you don't want to reapply, please do plan for at least that January meeting. We hope you all do continue to serve and for your council members or a new council member. So.
Great. So for those of us present in the room, we're going to have a little gathering afterwards about non-official discussion and social time. But for the meeting itself, I will adjourn and wish everybody happy holidays.